I'll never forget the moment I opened that envelope. My hands were still greasy from fixing breakfast, and the morning sun was barely spilling through the blinds when I tore it open. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. $2,000, not 200, not a typo. $2,000 for 1 month's electric bill. My heart slammed against my ribs, and for a second I thought I was going to pass out right there in the kitchen. The sound of cartoons buzzed from the living room where my daughter, Emily, sat cross-legged on the carpet with her bowl of cereal. The smell of toast lingered in the air, warm and familiar, but I couldn't taste a thing anymore. That bill burned through me like a fire. I blinked again, tracing the numbers with my finger, trying to convince myself I'd misread it. But no, $2,047.32. I'd always been careful. We weren't rich, but I worked hard and we budgeted for everything. My wife, Sarah, joked that I tracked every kilowatt like a hawk, turning off lights, unplugging chargers, reminding everyone to close the fridge door quickly. She laughed, but she also knew I was right. Every penny counted. And now, out of nowhere, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like an attack. I sank into the chair, paper shaking in my hands. The numbers blurred, but what hit me harder was the sudden thought. What if I can't pay this? What happens to us then? Daddy, Emily's voice was small. She looked at me with those big brown eyes, spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Are you okay? I forced a smile I didn't feel. Yeah, kiddo, just grown-up stuff. But inside, my mind was already racing. The HOA, it had to be them. We'd been butting heads for months. No, years, if I'm honest. When we first moved into the neighborhood, it looked like the perfect slice of the American dream. White fences, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes down the sidewalks. Sarah had fallen in love with the house immediately, and I admit, I did too. We pictured birthdays in the backyard, Christmas lights twinkling along the roof, barbecues with neighbors who'd become family. For a while it was exactly that, at least until Karen arrived. Her name was really Karen. I couldn't make that up. She became HOA president within 6 months of moving in, and it was like she'd been waiting her whole life to wield that kind of power. Suddenly there were fines for improperly coiled hoses, warnings for non-standard mailbox paint, and constant courtesy notices about grass length. My mailbox had more HOA letters than actual mail some weeks. At first, I tried to play nice. I attended meetings, offered to help, smiled even when she talked down to me. But Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She was interested in control. And now, staring at that impossible bill, I knew she'd finally gone too far. Hey, Sarah's voice pulled me back. She walked into the kitchen, still in her robe, hair tied up messily. She leaned over my shoulder, kissed my cheek, and then saw the paper in my hand. Her eyes narrowed. What is that? I handed it to her silently. She read it once, then again, lips moving like she couldn't believe it either. This can't be right. It's not a mistake, I said flatly. My voice sounded harsher than I meant, but the words tumbled out anyway. It's them, I know it. Come on, she sighed, though her tone wasn't convinced. They can't just change our bill. I looked at her. Sarah, remember last month when Karen sent that email about shared power resources, when she said our outdoor lights were a drain on community costs? I told you it sounded like a threat. Sarah rubbed her temples. You think she actually? Yes, I didn't let her finish. She did this. The kitchen went quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint sound of Emily's show in the other room. Sarah set the bill down on the counter, her face pale. Then what are we going to do? That question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I didn't respond right away because I didn't know. Part of me wanted to storm over to Karen's pristine house, slam the bill on her granite countertop, and demand answers. But another part of me, deeper, darker, was already thinking of something else. A way to fight back. A way to hurt them the way they'd just hurt me. I glanced at Emily again, her laughter now filling the room as she watched cartoons, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. For her sake, for Sarah's, I couldn't just let this go. My fists clenched under the table. If the HOA wanted a war, I was ready to give them one. And it would start with the one thing they valued most, power. Literally. Because if they thought they could spike my bill by $2,000, I was going to show them what it felt like to sit in the dark. And that's when the idea hit me, sharp, final, dangerous. What if I blacked out the entire HOA? The thought scared me, but it thrilled me too. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I wasn't powerless anymore. I folded the bill carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and stood up. Sarah's eyes followed me, searching, worried. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. I looked at her, the words tasting like fire in my mouth. It wasn't the first time the HOA had crossed a line, but something about that morning cracked something inside me. I couldn't shake the memory of how it all started, back when we still believed moving here was the best decision we'd ever made. I remember our first summer in the neighborhood. The smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the air, sprinklers clicked rhythmically down the street, and kids played tag until the streetlights came on. We threw a barbecue in our backyard the first weekend after we moved in. I can still hear the sizzling burgers, the sound of ice clinking in the cooler, the laughter of neighbors who seemed so friendly then. We felt safe, like we'd finally found home. My parents even came to visit that first summer. My dad, always the skeptic, walked around the yard with his hands behind his back like he was inspecting the property. "Not bad," he said gruffly, though I saw the hint of approval in his eyes. Mom, on the other hand, loved everything. "Oh, this is perfect for Emily. She'll have a wonderful childhood here." And for a while, she was right. It wasn't until Karen became president of the HOA that the cracks started to show. At first, she hid behind politeness. She'd wave from her driveway, smiling that tight, controlled smile. She came to our barbecue, even brought a store-bought pie. But once she had the gavel in her hand, she turned into something else. It was like watching a mask slip off. I'll never forget the first letter. A thin white envelope tucked into our mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo. It smelled faintly of printer ink and cheap paper when I tore it open. Inside was a friendly reminder that our trash can had been visible from the street for more than 20 minutes after pickup. 20 minutes. The letter warned of future fines if it happened again. I laughed it off then, but Sarah didn't. "It's weird," she said, frowning as she read it over my shoulder. "Why not just knock on the door and tell us?" That was Karen's way, always paper, never face-to-face, always a threat hiding under a smile. But the strangest part was how she treated others. Our next-door neighbors, the Carsons, left their trash can out for days sometimes, and not once did they get a letter. Their grass grew high enough to hide a small child, and still nothing. I asked around casually and learned what I already suspected. Karen and Mrs. Carson were best friends. They went to yoga together, had wine nights. Rules didn't apply to them. Over time, it became a pattern. My family got fined for everything. Christmas lights hung up too early. A flower bed, not consistent with community guidelines. Even the color of Emily's playhouse in the backyard. "Are you serious?" I had asked at one meeting, holding up the bright yellow slip. "It's a child's playhouse. It's not even visible from the street." Karen just smiled from her seat at the head of the table, flipping her papers with deliberate calm. "Rules are rules," she said sweetly. "We can't make exceptions." "But the Carsons painted theirs bright purple," I shot back. "That's different," she said, eyes narrowing. "They applied for approval first." Sarah squeezed my knee under the table, silently begging me not to push further. But I could feel my ears burning, the unfairness clawing at me. Favoritism, nepotism, call it what you want, it was poison. It didn't just end with the Carsons either. Karen's brother-in-law lived 2 streets over, and suddenly his giant RV parked in his driveway was grandfathered in. Another friend of hers put up a 6-foot fence, which was against every written rule, but apparently special considerations had been made. Meanwhile, I once got a violation for leaving a ladder leaning against my house for a single afternoon while fixing a gutter. It wasn't just petty, it was personal. The more it went on, the more it started seeping into my family life. I'd come home after long days at work to find Sarah upset over another envelope, or Emily confused because her swing set was suddenly not allowed in its spot. I felt powerless to protect them in a place that was supposed to be ours. And then came the so-called Community Energy Initiative. That's when Karen really crossed the line. I remember the meeting like it was yesterday. The HOA gathered in the clubhouse, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air, folding chairs scraping against the tile floor. Karen stood at the front with a projector, clicking through slides with graphs and charts that looked official but didn't make much sense. "As you all know," she began in that syrupy voice, "our community values sustainability. That's why the board has approved a shared power distribution plan to help regulate excess usage." I frowned immediately. Shared power distribution? What does that even mean? "It means," she said, flashing me that smile that never reached her eyes, "that households using more than the average amount of power will contribute a little extra to cover community needs. It's fair." Fair, that word made my stomach twist. I glanced around the room. A few people nodded along, others looked confused, but no one spoke up. I wanted to shout to demand details, but Sarah tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Don't make a scene." I bit my tongue that night, but deep down I knew what was coming. And now, with that $2,000 bill in my hand, my worst fear was confirmed. They weren't just monitoring us, they were targeting us. Back in the kitchen, Sarah's words echoed in my head. Then what are we going to do? I thought of my dad again, how he used to tell me when I was a kid. Don't start fights, son, but don't you ever let someone push you around either. The HOA had been pushing for years, and this time they'd pushed too far. My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of the memory. It was a text from my brother, Daniel. Heard about the bill. You okay? I stared at the screen, jaw tight. How did he even know already? News spread fast in this neighborhood, especially when Karen was the one spreading it. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long time, I typed exactly what I felt. No, but I'm going to fix it. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. Emily's laughter carried in from the living room. Sarah's worried eyes followed me as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. I paused, hand on the knob, heart pounding like a war drum. To find out just how far they've gone. The sun was sharp that morning, almost too bright as I stepped outside. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement, the sprinklers having just clicked off. Each step down the sidewalk felt heavier than the last, my mind looping one thought over and over. If they could do this once, they could do it again. I wasn't going to let them. Karen's house sat 3 doors down, a pristine 2-story with perfect flower beds and a flagpole that looked like it belonged at a courthouse. Her blinds were always tilted just so, giving her the perfect vantage point of the street. It was no accident. Karen liked to watch, to control. As I walked, I spotted Mrs. Carson in her driveway, pulling weeds half-heartedly. She looked up, gave me a tight smile, then ducked her head quickly back to her work. The way she avoided my eyes told me everything. She already knew about the bill, too. Gossip traveled faster than wind here, carried on whispers and smirks. By the time I reached Karen's door, my palms were sweating. I rang the bell, the chime echoing inside her house like a judge's gavel. A moment later, she appeared. Perfectly pressed blouse, hair set in stiff waves, lips painted a color that didn't suit her smile at all. "Well," she said, her voice dripping fake warmth. "Good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I held up the envelope, shaking it slightly. "You know why I'm here." Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. She didn't even flinch. "Ah, the power bill. Yes, I heard you received quite the surprise." "Heard," I snapped. "You caused it." Her smile widened, shark-like. Now, that's a serious accusation." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Cut the act, Karen. This isn't just some mix-up. You and your little board cooked this up, and you know it." For a moment, she dropped the sweetness. Her eyes hardened, voice tightening. "Maybe if you didn't use so much excessive lighting, this wouldn't have happened. The rules are in place for a reason." "My daughter's nightlight," I shot back. "My wife cooking dinner, that excessive." "You wouldn't understand," she said coolly, folding her arms. "Community living requires sacrifices. Not everyone is cut out for it." Something inside me snapped. "You mean not everyone is one of your friends?" Her lips pursed, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. She leaned in slightly, her perfume sharp and cloying. "I'd be very careful about the tone you're taking with me. The board doesn't look kindly on hostility." I wanted to scream, to call her every name I'd been biting back for years. Instead, I shoved the bill against her chest. "This isn't hostility, this is robbery, and you're not going to get away with it." She took the paper delicately, as if it were something dirty she didn't want to touch. Then, with a little smirk, she folded it neatly and handed it back. "Maybe you should budget better. I suggest cutting down on your outdoor lights first." That was it, the calmness in her voice, the smug tilt of her head. I turned without another word and walked away, my blood boiling. Every step felt like stomping down fire, but inside me the flames only spread. By the time I reached home, Sarah was waiting by the door, her arms crossed. "Well." I shook my head. She's not even pretending anymore, she basically admitted it. Sarah's face fell. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked into the garage, flipping on the light. The smell of oil and wood filled the air. My tools hung neatly on the wall, rows of sockets and screwdrivers lined up like soldiers. I stared at them, ideas buzzing like angry bees in my head. That's when Daniel showed up. I heard his truck before I saw it, the low rumble pulling into the driveway. He climbed out, tall and broad-shouldered, still in his mechanic's uniform, hands stained with grease. He had our dad's posture, back straight, jaw set, but his eyes were softer. "Hey," he said, stepping into the garage. "You good?" "No," I said bluntly. "They're bleeding us dry, look at this." I shoved the bill into his hands. He whistled low. "Damn, that's criminal." "Exactly." I leaned against the workbench, running a hand through my hair. "But Karen knows exactly what she's doing, and she thinks she can get away with it." Daniel's brow furrowed. "So what are you thinking?" I hesitated, words balancing on the edge of my tongue. I hadn't said it out loud yet, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "if they want to mess with my power, maybe I mess with theirs." Daniel's eyes widened. "You mean?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Yeah, blackout." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, to my surprise, he let out a short laugh. "You're insane." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm done playing by their rules." He sobered quickly, shaking his head. "You realize what you're saying, right? This isn't just a prank, it's illegal." "So is what they're doing," I shot back. "But nobody cares because they're hiding behind rules and paperwork. Someone has to hit them where it hurts." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, glancing toward the house. "What about Sarah? About Emily?" That question hit me like a punch. For a moment, the fire cooled. My family, my little girl, could I really risk everything just to prove a point? But then I remembered Emily's confusion when her swing set was taken down. Sarah's pale face when she saw the bill. The humiliation, the powerlessness. I clenched my fists. "I'm not risking everything, I'm taking it back." Daniel sighed, looking at me like I was already too far gone. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." And as the thought settled in, a single question screamed in my head, louder than any doubt. What would they do if one day all their lights went out? The plan started small in my head, almost like a whisper. But whispers can turn into roars when you feed them long enough. I couldn't sleep that night. The ceiling fan buzzed overhead, shadows stretched across the room, and Sarah breathed steadily beside me. My mind wouldn't stop replaying Karen's smirk, the casual way she told me to budget better. By 2 a.m., I was sitting in the garage with the door cracked, cool night air drifting in, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and gasoline. Daniel sat across from me, elbows on his knees, shaking his head like he couldn't believe we were even talking about this. "Just so I understand," he said finally, "you're actually thinking of shutting down the entire neighborhood's power." "Not permanently," I said, voice low. "Just long enough for them to feel it, to realize they can't control everything." He leaned back, exhaling hard. "That's not a scare tactic, man. That's sabotage." I rubbed my temples. "What else do we do? Another meeting? Another letter? They've already buried us. This is the only language Karen understands." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. The hum of crickets filled the silence. Finally, he muttered, "You really are Dad's son." That stung, but I didn't deny it. Dad was stubborn, unyielding. When he believed something was wrong, he didn't care what it cost to fight back. He'd always said, "The worst thing a man can do is stay silent when someone's stepping on his neck." Maybe I was about to prove him right, or prove him a fool. By the next evening, the plan was no longer just an idea. Daniel had reluctantly agreed to look the other way, which was his way of saying he wouldn't stop me but wouldn't officially help either. I didn't blame him. He had more to lose than me, a business, a reputation. I only had my family, and they were already being ripped apart by the HOA's games. I drove around that night, windows down, taking note of every transformer box, every power junction I'd passed 100 times without noticing. Funny how invisible things become until you need them. The boxes hummed faintly, surrounded by weeds and the sharp smell of metal. Back home, Sarah noticed my mood immediately. "You're planning something," she said, watching me too closely. I tried to brush her off, but she stepped closer, touching my arm. "Please don't do anything reckless." Her voice wavered, and I could hear the fear buried under her words. That almost broke me. Almost. "I'm just tired of being pushed around," I said softly. "Tired of them treating us like pawns. I need to show them they can't do this to us anymore." Her eyes searched mine as if she could pull the truth right out of me. Finally, she whispered, "Just don't drag us down with you." That stayed with me as I slipped out later that night. The streets were dark and quiet, only the occasional porch light flickering. My breath fogged in the cool air. Every step felt louder than it should have, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I found myself standing in front of the main utility box at the edge of the subdivision, the one that fed the entire neighborhood. My hands shook as I pulled out my tools. The cold metal was slick under my fingers, the smell of ozone sharp as I worked. For a moment I hesitated. One twist of the wrist, one cut of a wire, and everything would change. I thought of Emily asleep in her bed with her nightlight glowing softly. I thought of Sarah's worried face. And then, Corinne's smug smile, the $2,000 bill, the years of humiliation. That was enough. I did it. The snap echoed louder than I expected, followed by a low hum dying into silence. And then, like dominoes, one by one, every light in the neighborhood blinked out. Porch lights, street lamps, the glowing windows of Corinne's fortress. All gone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sudden rise of voices, neighbors shouting, dogs barking, a baby crying somewhere down the street. The air felt electric, charged with panic and confusion. I slipped back into the shadows, adrenaline surging like fire through my veins. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd taken something back. But the high didn't last. Because just minutes later, as I cut through the alley toward home, I heard the sickening crunch of metal. A car had slammed into a stop sign at the intersection, its headlights gone dead before the impact. Screams cut through the night. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just darkness anymore, someone was hurt. I froze, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My hands still smelled of copper and sweat, my mind reeling with the realization of what I'd just caused. The neighborhood wanted power. Well, now they knew what it was like to lose it. But at what cost? The sound of that crash wouldn't leave my head. Metal against metal, a shattering of glass, the echo of screams. It played on a loop as I stood frozen in the shadows. My chest heaved, lungs struggling to pull an air that suddenly felt too thick. For a second, I thought about running home, slipping into bed like nothing had happened. Pretending I didn't hear, didn't see. But the guilt already gnawed at me, sharper with every passing second. Someone out there was hurt, maybe dying, and whether anyone else knew it or not, I had caused it. By the time my legs started moving, neighbors were already rushing toward the intersection. Flashlights cut through the dark, bouncing wildly. I pushed through the crowd, heart hammering, until I saw it. A minivan crumpled against the bent stop sign, its front end smoking. "Call 911, someone shouted. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air. A woman's sobs tore through the night as she pounded on the driver's side window. Through the spiderweb of shattered glass, I saw movement. A figure slumped forward against the airbag, groaning weakly. I didn't even think. I ran forward, yanking at the handle. Stuck. My hands slipped on the metal, my pulse roaring in my ears. Finally, with a grunt, the door creaked open. Inside was Mr. Hernandez, the quiet man who lived 2 streets over. His glasses were askew, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. His eyes fluttered weakly open. "Hang on," I said, my voice shaking. "You're gonna be okay." His breath rasped, warm against my arm. The airbag deflated with a hiss, and I could see bruising already blooming across his chest. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Red and blue lights soon splashed across the houses, the chaos snapping into motion. EMTs swarmed the scene, shouting orders, pulling stretchers. The crowd pressed back, murmuring, their faces pale in the flashing lights. I stumbled away, hands trembling, the coppery smell of blood clinging to my skin. My stomach churned. Every fiber of me screamed that this was my fault, but no one else knew. To them, it was just a terrible accident during a blackout. But I knew. The next hours blurred. I ended up at the hospital, standing in the sterile brightness of the waiting room. The harsh smell of antiseptic burned my nose, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Sarah arrived, pale and frantic, Emily in tow with sleep still clinging to her eyes. "What happened?" she demanded, grabbing my arm. "There was an accident," I muttered, my throat dry. Her eyes searched mine. "Are you okay?" I nodded stiffly. I wasn't okay, not even close. Doctors rushed past us, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. The sound made my skin crawl. It was the sound of life clinging by a thread. Finally, a nurse came out. She was young, her scrubs wrinkled, eyes tired but sharp. "Mr. Hernandez is stable," she said. "He has a concussion, fractured ribs, and some internal bruising, but we got to him in time." Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. My knees gave out and Sarah had to steady me. But just as quickly as it came, the relief twisted into something darker. Stable didn't erase what I'd done. Was it the blackout?" someone asked from the waiting room. I turned to see Mrs. Carson sitting in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her voice carried a hint of accusation. The nurse hesitated. "Well, his vehicle lost power as he turned into the intersection. Without headlights, visibility was limited." A murmur rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The blackout wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was dangerous, deadly. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting everyone. Hours later, after the chaos dulled, I stood alone by the vending machine. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and hollow-eyed. My hands still shook when I reached for a bottle of water. Daniel appeared, his expression grim. "I heard," he said quietly. "Is he gonna make it?" "Yeah," I whispered, "but it was close." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is exactly what I warned you about. You wanted to send a message, and now look, you almost killed a man." "I know," I snapped, my voice cracking. "You think I don't know that?" His eyes softened, but only slightly. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. My throat was thick, my thoughts tangled. What now? Confess? Deny? Pretend I had nothing to do with it? The weight of the secret pressed down harder than any fine or bill ever had. But deep down, I already knew one thing for certain. The HOA wasn't finished, and neither was I. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crash, the bent stop sign, the blood on my hands, the way Mr. Hernandez's chest rose and fell like it might be his last breath. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the faint glow of the streetlights, until the sun finally began bleeding through the blinds. Sarah found me there hunched over, hands knotted together. She didn't speak at first. She just stood in the doorway, her robe wrapped tightly around her, her face pale and unreadable. Finally, she whispered, "Tell me it wasn't you." The silence stretched between us. My throat locked up, my heart pounding so hard it felt like the room shook with it. Her eyes glistened. "Please tell me you didn't cause the blackout." I couldn't lie, not to her, not when she looked at me like that. My voice cracked when I finally said it. "It was me." Her hand flew to her mouth. She turned away, her whole body trembling. For a moment, I thought she might walk out, take Emily, and never come back. "Do you understand what you've done?" she hissed, spinning back toward me. "A man could have died, people could have." Her voice broke, choked off by anger and fear. "I know," I whispered. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted them to feel it, to feel what they've been doing to us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "This isn't about them anymore. This is about you, us. You crossed a line, and now our whole family is standing on it with you." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the room like a blade. We froze. Sarah's eyes widened, panic flooding her face. "Is it the police?" I stood slowly, my legs heavy, my chest tight. Every step toward the door felt like walking into an execution. I pulled it open and found Daniel on the porch, his face grave. "We need to talk," he said. Inside, he didn't waste time. He closed the door firmly behind him and spoke in a low voice. "The HOA is already spinning this. Karen's saying the blackout was intentional sabotage. She's demanding an investigation." My blood went cold. Does she know it was me? Daniel shook his head. "Not yet, but if the cops trace it or if anyone saw you, you're screwed. Not just with the HOA, with the law." Sarah crossed her arms, her face streaked with tears. "So what do you suggest, Daniel? He just lies, pretends he didn't almost kill someone." Daniel's eyes flicked to me, sharp and unyielding. "No, he shuts up, that's what he does. He keeps his mouth shut and we handle this, together." I shook my head, torn apart inside. "He almost died, Daniel. Mr. Hernandez almost died because of me." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. "You think Karen cares about Hernandez? She'll use this to bury you, to strip everything from you, your house, your family, your future. You confess, you don't get justice, you just get destroyed." Sarah's voice cracked. So the plan is what? Live with this lie forever. Watch the neighbors point fingers while we sit here knowing the truth. Daniel didn't flinch. Yes, if it means keeping your family safe. The room spun. My heart pulled in two directions, toward Sarah, whose eyes begged me to do the right thing, and toward Daniel, whose hard stare demanded silence. For the first time in my life, I didn't know who to be loyal to. My conscience, my family, or the brother who'd always protected me. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I can't carry this," I whispered. Sarah's voice broke into sobs. "Then don't tell the truth." Daniel leaned forward, his voice like steel. "If you do, you'll lose everything. Think about Emily, think about Sarah. You don't get to just fall on the sword and leave them behind." The house fell into silence, thick with fear, anger, and the crushing weight of my secret. And deep down, I knew the choice I made next would decide not just my fate, but all of ours. I thought the silence in my living room that night was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the silence inside my own head the next morning. No matter how many times Daniel's words echoed, "Shut up, stay quiet, protect your family," Sarah's voice cut through louder. "Tell the truth." Every time I looked at Emily eating her cereal, legs swinging from the chair, innocence in her eyes, I knew I couldn't raise her on a lie this big. Not when every siren outside made me jump. Not when I saw the news replaying the accident, Mr. Hernandez's broken body on a stretcher, his daughter crying out for her father. I had to face it. So I did the unthinkable. That afternoon, I walked into the police station. The air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. My palms were slick with sweat. My voice shook as I told the officer at the desk that I had information about the blackout. When they brought me into a small interview room, my chest felt like it was collapsing. "I did it," I finally confessed. "I caused the outage, it was me." The detective across the table leaned forward, studying me. "You're admitting to intentionally tampering with the HOA's power grid." I nodded, the words tasting like ash. "Yes, it was me. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to hit back. I was angry. I was stupid." They recorded every word. When I walked out hours later, I wasn't in cuffs, not yet. But the weight on my chest didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. Sarah was waiting in the car, tears in her eyes. She didn't say anything, just reached for my hand. A week passed, then another. We lived in limbo, waiting for the fallout. The HOA meetings exploded into chaos. Karen stood at the center, spitting venom about criminal sabotage and endangering the community. People shouted at her, others shouted back, and for once the perfect facade of the HOA cracked wide open. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Mr. Hernandez himself showed up at the next meeting, bandaged, limping, but alive. He silenced the entire room with his presence alone. "I know who did it," he said, his voice weak but steady, "and I know why." Every eye turned toward me. My stomach dropped, but I stood up. I wouldn't run anymore. "I did it," I said aloud, my voice breaking. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's smug grin spread like she'd won, but then Mr. Hernandez lifted his hand. He told the truth. That matters more than you think. The room went quiet. And then something unexpected. Neighbors who once whispered behind my back began speaking up. Stories about Karen's harassment, the HOA's bullying tactics, their unfair fines and intimidation came pouring out. What I did was reckless, dangerous even, but it cracked open the dam of silence. The police gave me community service, probation, and a fine that nearly emptied us. It could have been worse, much worse, but my confession and Hernandez's statement spared me prison. Sarah stood by me, though trust took months to rebuild. Emily never fully understood, but she knew something heavy had passed between us. Daniel, he didn't speak to me for a long time. He called me a fool, said I'd thrown away everything. Maybe he was right. But deep down, I knew I made the only choice I could live with. Months later, after endless hearings and lawsuits, the HOA collapsed under its own corruption. Karen was voted out in disgrace after investigators uncovered years of shady practices. Our neighborhood was no longer picture-perfect. The fences weren't all white, the lawns weren't always trimmed, but it was real, and it was finally free. Every night when I walk past the breaker box that started it all, I feel the scar. A reminder of anger, pride, and the cost of revenge. A reminder of the night I let rage consume me, and the long road it took to crawl back. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Truth doesn't erase mistakes. It doesn't fix the damage, but it's the only thing that lets you face the mirror again. So now I ask you, if you were in my place, would you have stayed quiet to protect your family? Or would you have spoken the truth, knowing it could destroy you? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story shook you, subscribe, because more stories like this one are coming.